It's Kristin with AB Fine Art Studio here with another art lesson for you. So this is our June 2021 art box lesson. It is a koi fish and it's gorgeous. If you don't have an art box, if you're not getting our art box, you can always go to our website and order it. It's not too late. Those will stay on there. And so if this is like months in the future and you still want to do it, it should be on our website. You can go ahead and order the box. And then you'll have all the supplies you need to complete this project. So you get your paints, your brushes, your pencil, any kind of technique supply you need. This one is kind of fun. It has a straw in it. So everything would be in there. If you don't have the box and you want to follow along anyway, all you need is a pencil and a piece of paper. If you want to work in a medium, you can work in any medium you have at home. But if you want to do the watercolor technique I'm going to show you in this composition, you're going to want to use watercolors, watercolor paper, and a straw. So go ahead and you can pause and go make sure you have all those supplies or order the supplies. It doesn't hurt to do the drawing project anyways, but if you want to do the watercolor portion, you're going to want to go ahead and find all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the drawing portion of this project. I always like to start on just a clean white piece of paper and use it as a sketch paper. Let me just grab a couple pens. And then transfer it over to my final paper. If you're brave and you want to go for it, go ahead. But I like to start with pencil on a sketch paper. I'm going to use a marker just because it shows up better. But it's okay because it's just a sketch, so I don't need to worry about erasing anything. There's no mistakes in art. For this, just like anything we teach with our studio, we're always talking about breaking things down with shapes. So we don't need to get overwhelmed by anything we draw because we can see shapes, which are just curvy lines and straight lines coming together in a composition. So I'm going to really talk about that with this fish because it can look a little bit overwhelming and we really want to get this flow and we want to fill up the composition with that one fish. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a nice backward C shape on my paper. This is going to be a guideline. So this wouldn't be something you would keep in a final composition. You'd go in and erase this. But this kind of gives me an idea of the size and the flow of my fish. That way I'm not trying to just sketch it as I go. Again, if you're right-brained, some people can look at anything they want to draw and they can just draw it. They see the lines in space and they're able to do that. But for a lot of us, this helps gauge how big something should be and what direction it should go in. The next shape I'm going to add is an oval. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just telling me where my fish's head is. And once I have this, I'm going to create kind of like a tapered triangle shape that's going to come onto this oval. So it's kind of like a cone shape. So now I've got the shape of this fish, and I'm going to add the fin. So you can start out just by making triangle shapes first. So that gives me an idea, again, of the size and the shape. That's not what I want my finished fin to look like. I want to kind of create that floaty look. So I'm going to go back around and soften these lines. So in the original composition, it doesn't go off the page. You'll probably notice I'm starting to go off the page. And we really encourage to make this your own. I kind of like when there's a feature in a composition like this fish and it's going off the page because I feel like it makes it have more of an impact. You feel like there's more to this than just this fish, but you can make it any way you want. I'm going to start out with ovals for my fins because one fin is really close to me and one fin is far away. So I'm just going to put little ovals in here first just to gauge about how big they are in relationship to each other. And also where they are on the fish's form because I'm seeing it from the side. Once I have this, I can go in and add to it. And this is just a sketch, but if you want to start kind of creating these curvy lines that help the roundness of the fish, you can do that. And then this fin is kind of flipping. So I'm going to add that. And just create this one curved line. So when I'm done, this will be lighter, this will be shadowed, and that's going to give that illusion like it's kind of turning. Yeah. There's another little fin on the side of the fish's body. So I'm going to make like an oval shape there. And then there's an itty bitty guy kind of hiding back in here. And then again, once I have those shapes, I'm going to finish them off. So I'm adding a little point to these back here. Then there's a fin that's going to go along the top of the body, and that's going to help emphasize as well that turn of the body. So I'm going to come along here, and I had this first line I made. I'm not going to use that for all of it, but I am going to come across right about there. And then you can add some lines to that as well. So if you're working with pencil, you probably want to erase this line, this extra space here. I'm going to add some lines to that fin as well. Just really emphasize that. Then the fish's eye is going to be right here. And then you can see a little bit of the mouth, so I'm just going to create an indent of the mouth and then add in these whiskers. I'm sure there's an appropriate name to call these. I'm sure they're not called whiskers. I don't know what it is. If you know what it is, write me and tell me. I would love it. The only other part of this fish that's really important is the all the splotches on it. So you can just kind of map that out. This is something to have fun with. These are not any specific design. You can just kind of make it what you will wherever you want these splotches. And this is it for the composition. It's really not that complicated, and it shouldn't be intimidating. Breaking it down with shapes makes it so simple. So anytime you want to draw something you're looking at, look at it and find those shapes. Once you find those shapes and their size in relation to each other, it makes it really simple to draw so many things. So this is the point where you might want to pause and transfer onto a piece of watercolor paper or a final paper. If you're going to just go ahead and color this, you can stick with this. Just go ahead and erase a bunch of those lines that you don't want to keep. And then we're going to start on the watercolor. So if you're using a different medium, you can just follow along with the colors if you want to, or you can just go rogue and do it yourself. But again, if you're going to do watercolors with me, hit pause, and then we'll meet back together to do the painting part. If you're back, that means you have drawn your final composition on your watercolor paper, and like usual, I've cheated and I am using the watercolor paper that's pre-printed that comes in your art box. So you have the option of doing both. You're always going to have this pre-printed composition in there, which makes it really nice. It's fun to practice with the watercolor without the stress of trying to get the composition perfect on there. This one is outlined with a Sharpie marker, but if you're doing this in watercolor paper on your own, just leave your pencil. It's going to look absolutely gorgeous without the pen. You can always add a little pen and ink detail later when it's all dry, but just start out with this painting and then see what you want to add later. You may want to do all of your black areas with the watercolor paint. But what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to get my paint ready. So when you get these paint wells, what you're going to have in there is a nice paint that's a watercolor paint that's already dried inside the palette. You want to reactivate all of those paints. So I'm going to go ahead and start reactivating these by adding water. So again, if you have your kit, you should have your little water cup, and you can just put a little water in there. You have a tissue for dabbing your brush. You have all your paints ready to go. You don't have to go find them, hunt them down. That's the hardest thing for me at my house, is when we want to do a project. And I have all the supplies usually. I'm sure a lot of you do too if you're already, but getting them all gathered up is like super annoying sometimes. And this is so great because the project's ready to go. My kids are using these all the time. So this is that part I told you about with the straw that's really, really fun. I still want to size my paper. So I'm actually going to move this off of my easel for now, just to kind of give you an idea of what this is going to look like, because it's a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a couple areas, and you are going to notice that I'm dripping more than you will, just because I'm vertical here. If you're working on a flat surface, you're going to have a little bit more control, but you can always pick up your watercolor paper and move it around if you want a little bit of that like drip and flow kind of situation. So I've actually added some water around the outside of my fish. So this is still sizing my paper. It's preparing my paper to take on that watercolor paint. My paints have gotten nice and activated, and I'm just going to drop color in there, and you'll notice that the paint generally will stop wherever, oh, see, I'm dripping. It's okay. Wherever the water stops. For me, because I'm vertical, the water's going to move a little bit. But what you get to do with the straw, especially when you're on a flat surface, is just start to blow it around. And it creates this really fun kind of splatter effect. And that's what we want to do on here. We want the background to just be more setting the stage. Oh, I still had paint on my brush. Okay, this is going to be a drippy day. It is. Thank goodness you're not up here. Okay, so I'm kind of setting this tone behind my fish, and you can even do some splats. So this is the part where you just need to have fun with this. This shouldn't be stressful. This should be fun and silly. And even if some of it goes on my fish, I'm not worried. So I'm going to just keep turning my paper and see where else I want to stick some of this blue. It's kind of like a periwinkle. Love periwinkle. And as long as it's wet, I'm going to be able to move that paint around. So again, I can move it around by moving my paper. So if you don't have a straw, or you don't want to do that, that's okay. You can just move your paper around and get that same kind of crazy flowy floating effect. I've got some water up here, and it just flows out. Again, this is called wet into wet, and we use this a lot when we're creating skies and we want that watercolor to float into itself. It's getting really drippy. I'm going to be excited to see yours. Mine's really drippy, but it's so fun. Okay, so have fun with that straw. Blow that watercolor out wherever you want it to go. This should be kind of whimsical, creative, a little splashy, a little splattery. So I've set the background for my fish, and really take your time with this. You're not really on a time crunch, so you can always pause me and keep working on this. Add little splatters here and there wherever you want to add a little bit more interest. And I've noticed, like in the sample too, and you can do this as well. You can take your brush with some paint on it and create that splat. So I'm just tapping the brush. We've done this before to create kind of a snowy effect with the toothbrush when we want it like really even and soft. But this is a fun, just bloop, 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 bloop. It's water. It should be flowy and floaty. It's like the word for this water today. Flowy and floaty, floaty and flowy. So this, you're gonna want this area to dry quite a bit before you jump in with painting your fish, because we just saw what wet into wet does. As soon as that wet paint touches the water, it just floats out to wherever that water is. So if I go and I start to paint my fish, and maybe right here is really wet, and I'm adding one of the black spots or one of the orange spots, it's going to float into the blue. So blue and orange make brown, and that's probably not something you want in this composition. So let this dry a little bit before you get going. But I always like to start with my lighter colors first. So there's yellow on your palette and there's orange. So if you want to make more of like a goldeny orange, or you want to add any yellow to your koi, you can absolutely do that. And I love making it your own. So be creative with this. Don't make it look just like mine or Miss Susan's sample. Make it yours and have fun with that color. So I'm gonna just start, because this is nice and dry, I'm gonna just, like normal painting, I have a nice wet watercolor paint, and I'm gonna fill out this spot. So you should always feel, unless you're doing a dry brush technique, you should always feel like your brush is just floating along the page. You want enough watercolor paint that it's floating. Okay, there's a really good example. You can see that my outside was still a little wet, and now that blue has jumped into my spot. I'm gonna call that a happy accident because I think it looks kind of cool, but it's something to think about. Now you can see exactly what I was talking about when that wet into wet creates a new section there. That actually, the blue bled in, it's kind of pretty, but just bear that in mind when you're painting, that if you have any wet area in your watercolor and you're using another area with wet watercolor paint, that can happen. So I'm going to do this one orange, I think. I'm going really opposite of the sample now. I feel so rebellious. And I'm going to brush a little bit of orange into the tail. Again, you shouldn't hear your brush scratching along your watercolor paper. If it's scratching along your watercolor paper, that means you need more water on your brush or in your palette. It's called watercolors. I always say that when I'm teaching. It's called watercolors for a reason. Wet, wet, wet. Okay. Kind of fun. And then I'm going to do my black spots. So I'm going to do this one black. And traditionally in watercolor, you don't have like an opaque black. Some people won't even use black. They use, it's called Payne's Gray, and that's a really beautiful gray. So if you're using watercolors at home, maybe that's what you're using, and that would look gorgeous too. But the idea is not so much like, oh, I can't use that paint, but that you don't want it to be opaque. Watercolors are supposed to have a very washy, floaty kind of feel. So you always want to be able to see through whatever you're painting. And again, that's just a traditional mindset. So if you're not a traditional person, then you do you. And then I'm going to do this one. And I'm going to just add a couple more spots because I feel like it needs it in here. Right in there. Okay, and then the last spot would be the eye. So you have if you have the kit, you have a teeny tiny itty bitty detail brush. I could have used that for some of the spots too. I didn't, but make sure you're using a smaller brush for that. So I'm going to go in with this tiny detail brush. And when you're doing those details, that's a good time to use maybe a little bit less water in your paint because you want a little bit more control. I'm going to use my detail brush now to brush in some of the details on my fins. So if this makes you uncomfortable doing these lines with the watercolor, you can always wait until this is completely dry and go back with like ultrafine Sharpie would look really good. You could use that on the eye as well. But just do what makes you feel comfortable for this. With smaller brushes like this, you can get really nice thin lines, and it's all about how much pressure you're using with your brush. So I could come here and do like a super thick line, or I could come in and do a thin line. It's the same brush, it's just the amount of pressure I'm applying. So I'm just going to come in here, add some of these fin details. And these ones as well. So because this was a sample art, it already has a little bit of that pen and ink kind of look. And I'm just going over it with my brush and making it my own. So if you're using the sample, you could absolutely do that, make it your own. I think I'm just, because I'm feeling wild today, I'm just going to do a couple little boop boop of the black. I love when koi fish have those like little freckles. So I'm going to hit his face up with a few of those just to make it my own. So that's the whole painting. It's really simple. If you wanted to, again, I wait till it's a little more dry. I'm just going to go for it. You can outline the body of your fish as well, just to really help it stand out against that background. But it should, this one especially should have that like floaty, flowy, just really soft aspect to it. So I hope you enjoyed creating this painting with me. You don't have to ever stop when the video is over. Keep painting, keep working, do it again. Try a different fish in a different direction, or maybe a couple of them together and create maybe one fish that has a lot more orange and one that has a lot more black, or whatever you want to do to make it your own. Koi fish are absolutely gorgeous, and they come in lots of different designs and prints. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you guys next time with our next art lesson. Bye.